Flying taxis.
That's right.
That is our future, as if things go according to plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what we're working on.
And you actually brought a video. So before we just kind of kick things off, maybe we'll just show the video real quick and let people kind of see what you're thinking.
Perfect. Let's do it.
So you're going to start testing these in 2020.
That's right.
And then the
yeah.
plan is to deploy them in 2023. Is that still the timeline that we're working with?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the reason I really love that video, and I guess I should love it because I made it, but is that it really paints the picture of what we're trying to do with Uber Air in the context of Uber as a platform, which is this direction that the entire company is going, really clearly. That we've envisioned this future that's not about which vehicle you take or which mode you take, but rather how you want to take a trip. Do you want to get there in the most economical way? Do you want to get there in the fastest way? And being able to link together the modes into truly multimodal journeys that allow you to get there the way you want to get there. And that's the vision that we have. And so on the Elevate side, we're really focusing on this question of urban air, how do we build out this network of urban air vehicles and weave it into the Uber platform that exists right now and make those linkages so that you can have that like real multimodal journey with a single button press. You get everything you need to get from where you start to where you finish, and for a single price.
What kind of trips do you envision people using Uber Air for?
So there's a different taxonomy of different types of trips that people like to take, but we really want to be driven by the data on this. So what we've done is taken a really deep look at movement through cities. What we do is we model at a pretty granular level using both our own data, trip data, that kind of shows where people want to go, where there's pockets of demand effectively, and then supplement that with third-party data as well. Merge it together to get an overall understanding of where movement demand exists. And in those places, then we can put skyports, and that's where we'll go between, is like where basically people want to go the most and are willing to pay for what this type of service will cost in the beginning, which will be a bit of a premium relative to a car service, but we actually think we can drive the price down pretty aggressively over time and then add more nodes basically into the network to have more accessibility overall.
Using the San Francisco Bay Area as an example, assuming that this gets approved by the FAA and that the San Francisco Bay Area is down for this, where would you ideally put these skyports?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, it's driven by the data. And so what we do is we actually really look at these pockets of demand that we can see with a pretty high granularity and actually dive down even to buildings within a demand pocket to understand what are the ideal locations to secure access to for things like retrofitting a skyport onto the roof of a parking garage or things like that in these high demand areas, or looking at greenfield sites that we want to secure access to and able to put this type of infrastructure in, and really let the data tell us. And that's valuable not just because it'll make the network work better, but we can actually then we're driving partnerships. So we're working with big private equity companies that have capital that they want to put into the infrastructure side of things, and developers, people like the Macquarie and related, and companies like that, to actually differentially steer them effectively toward these assets that we think are of particular value in this context. And so we're letting the data tell us where that is.
Okay, but I guess for the types of trips themselves, I guess like could I envision like someone taking it to an airport, or maybe even like commuting if they wanted to get from San Jose to San Francisco, or vice versa?
And that's what the data does tell us. So there's like certain commute routes that are like of high value. We can see exactly kind of where like the best places to start and stop those routes are. We see demand to the airport. We see demand, in the LA region, for example, between like Santa Monica and downtown LA. We see kind of an arc of demand through that region. And then by looking at the actual contours of the demand, you can say, well, how many skyports should I put in to be able to cover that, and then be able to weave it into the ground network effectively, so I can have the minimum number of skyports to serve the maximum number of potential riders, which is then minimizes the infrastructure outlay costs.
So Uber launched Ubercopter in New York just yesterday, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And so that's, let's see, so that's about 200 to 225 per ride. It gets you from like Lower Manhattan to JFK.
That's correct. Yep.
Nice. And so, well, do you think that will be the starting price for Uber Air?
No. So what we're doing is we're launching Copter as a way to start to get at this question of how do you do these real multimodal journeys and learn those things now, because this is actually a pretty hard problem. So if the goal is to have kind of these starting and ending points and be able to in real time capture bookings from people in different parts of the city, batch them effectively because we have enough demand that we think we can batch and drive pretty high load factors into the vehicles, and do this kind of continuously on demand. And so we have to start somewhere, though. It's like it's a hard math problem, it's a hard operations problem, and so we're starting with a pretty high demand route that we understand pretty well, that we can start to learn all the operational constraints around this and give people a really awesome experience. So that's really the goal of what we're doing with Copter. And right now, today you can, if you're in our Diamond or Platinum tier of our rewards program, you're in Lower Manhattan, you can request a Copter, and we take care of everything. So you get the car, it takes you to the heliport, just a single price, end to end. And it's bi-directional, so you can do it from JFK back to Lower Manhattan as well. Which I think is really kind of illustrating that future that video is showing, right? That it's like, it's all about that trip. It's not about the mode. It's really fun to fly in a helicopter from Lower Manhattan to JFK too, but it's a great view. But it's fundamentally about that trip. It's about that linkage that is the first time we've really done this with a true kind of automated linking of the different modes together.
And do you think you'll use a similar model for Uber Air, specifically people in the Diamond or Platinum rewards program?
We'll see. I mean, it's a few years away from. We have to wait for the vehicles to be certified that we're working with our partners on to both design, certify, and then manufacture. I think that we'll take a measured approach, though, and that's what we're doing with Copter. We're taking a measured approach so that we're making sure we can keep the quality of service really high and give people a really, really good experience. And as we slowly then open up the accessibility of it to a wider audience, basically, we'll be able to keep that bar really high in terms of the service that we're offering.
And so I know that you said that the data will inform a lot of where you decide to kind of put these skyports, but more specifically, what will you be looking for in the data? Will you be looking for like number of people who live in the area, or like cars on the road? So
we're looking at a couple of different things. We're looking at the most fundamental level, movement. And so we have movement data on our network. We see how people want to move by different types of cars. We get third-party data that shows how people move through transit, how they move through any means, basically. Even some of the data picks up like relatively long trips on bike or on foot. And so we just want to understand movement patterns. We take that and we combine it with a probabilistic model we've built around preference. And so by working with people who specialize in doing this, we do a design of experiments and do a series of stated preference surveys, kind of sampling across the different launch markets that we're going to launch in. And then we can build a kind of basically a probabilistic understanding of what people will prefer. So if you're going between this origin and this destination, and transit costs this much, a self-driving car costs this much, and Uber Air costs this much. Like, what is the probability that you pick those? And so we do this thousands of times, build up this probabilistic model of choice, and then we can take that and effectively use it as a filter against this overall movement data. And then we can adjust the price point based on our kind of assumptions and our cost model that go into, are we in the early launch phase where we assume maintenance costs are this? Are we in a later phase where they're this? And then we can see how the demand changes and the total addressable market grows as we kind of adjust those variables.
But I guess I would imagine that it'd be in pretty dense areas.
So yeah, I mean, definitely the more density is good in this case because you get liquidity in the overall market. You want to keep the utilization high and you want to keep the load factors high, just like in commercial aviation today, so that you can amortize the capital cost of the asset and of the skyport over more trips, and then it's cheaper for everyone.
So you're looking to start testing these, or start demonstrating them next year.
That's correct.
And I know that you're not going to say exactly where you will be testing them, but will there be a skyport involved as early as next year?
So we have 2 launch markets in the U.S. that we've announced, and we just announced our 3rd launch market, which will be outside the U.S. So in the U.S. it's Dallas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and the LA region as the 2 in U.S. launch markets. And we announced Melbourne, Australia as our 3rd launch market outside the U.S. And so we are working with local stakeholders in all of these markets. Actually have a team in Australia right now working with local stakeholders on what these plans actually look like. And so I think one of the interesting things that we're working on that we announced at our big summit that we did a couple weeks ago is we're working with our developer partner in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Hillwood, and they are working to kind of stand up an aviation innovation zone out of an airport that they run that's north of Fort Worth. And so we think that's a really interesting opportunity to kind of put in the infrastructure and the place to really kind of help to demonstrate the value of this new type of aviation to a wide audience and bring people in to see it and understand it, to hear it, importantly, and really demonstrate that value firsthand.
So there are obviously a lot of moving parts and a lot of variables to making Uber Air a reality.
Yep.
What do you think is the biggest barrier right now to launching Uber Air at scale?
So it's really an interesting systems problem. I mean, an aircraft itself is a system of systems in a way. And so we're building like a system of a system of a system. And so all of these parts have to exist. It's not good enough just to have the aircraft because there has to be a place for it to take off and land. And it's not just good enough to have the takeoff and landing places because if you don't have the right kind of aircraft, you have nothing to operate out of that. So you have to kind of impedance match all of these different things that you're doing at the same time. So the partnerships on skyports, the partnerships in the aircraft, the operational software that we're building to manage the whole thing, the airspace automation work that we're doing in partnership with NASA and other people. You have to kind of do all of these things at the right rate so it comes together at the right time to be able to launch it. From a technology standpoint, I mean, certainly the vehicles don't exist yet. We have 6 partners that we've announced that we're working with, big companies like Boeing and Bell and Embraer and startups, Jaunt, Carum, and Pipistrel, so we have taken kind of a portfolio approach in how we're partnering on these types of vehicles. There's work that needs to be done there still. I mean, I think that it's really a matter of today's tech works. The batteries are good enough, barely good enough, but they're good enough to make all electric versions of these that really hit the noise and the cost and the economic targets that we have. But it's just a lot of really hard engineering that has to be done to bring that to reality.
Yeah, and I know that Uber has been having ongoing conversations with the FAA, and the FAA is they're the agency that gets to say yes or no, you cannot do this. How have those conversations evolved over the years? Like, I guess when you first started talking with the FAA, like, were they just like, no, like, there's no way, and now they're like, well, maybe, or yeah. How has that conversation evolved?
Well, it's interesting. So I've been working on this for almost a decade now in different contexts. And when we first started a long time ago at a different company, in initial conversations with the FAA, it was very much like, your people are crazy, right? And it's been amazing to see the evolution. So the FAA has been very leaned in, especially over the last few years, as we've gotten more concrete, more serious. We've brought in big players to the table that are very serious about doing this. Big money is being invested in this across multiple different projects and companies. And I mean, we had the FAA acting administrator on stage at the summit, and he made a very strong endorsement of the vision that we've laid out. Now, there's a lot of hard work to do, and we've taken this approach at Elevate that fundamentally we have to be partners with the regulators as much as we're partners with the vehicle makers and as much as we're partners with the Skyport developers and others, because aviation is probably the most regulated of industries in a way, that everything is a pre-market approval. It takes years and years and $500 million to $1 billion to bring one of these vehicles to market. And it's just highly regulated. And so you have to be partnering and working with the regulators from the very beginning in order to develop the relationships that help to be able to build all of it together. You can't go around them. Like you must work with the regulators and be a good actor in that way.
Yeah, I remember Dan Elwell, the acting administrator of the FAA, saying at Elevate that safety is paramount. So what has Uber been doing to ensure that these vehicles are actually safe to fly in? Yeah,
we completely share that philosophy. I mean, if you look at the aviation system today, it's amazingly safe. It's a testament to all the work that the FAA and all of the operators and manufacturers have done kind of over the last 10, 15 years. We've seen dramatic improvements on every metric. So what we're trying to do on the Elevate side is take a look at the commercial passenger aviation industry in the U.S., which is kind of the North Star for the type of safety record, and look at what are the key best practices that have been put into place that have led to that incredible safety record. And so, for example, we are implementing on the Elevate side what's called a safety management system, which is kind of it's a systematic way of collecting, setting up the structures and the processes effectively to collect safety data across the board, basically, and then record it and be able to then run queries on it, to run processes against it. In a structured way that things don't fall through the cracks. And this is one of the key things that's been implemented worldwide, basically, over the last few years, that we think is really, really important to kind of make a bedrock foundation of what we're doing. And then also looking into things like safety data sharing. So there's anonymized data sharing is like kind of the standard thing that's done in the airline industry right now. So anonymized safety data sharing. And so you can learn from other people's mistakes and not have to learn from it yourself effectively, right? And so we think that that's actually really important as well. So we're going to be implementing that as we develop our network over time, where we'll kind of be effectively able to mandate anonymized data sharing in what we're doing, to make sure that we are trying to take to heart these lessons that have been learned in another sector of the industry.
And then maybe 10 years from now, they'll be autonomous, so theoretically safer.
Yeah, so we do think that that's the direction the technology is going. We in our partners that we're working with, we believe the right way to start is with pilots. And so all of the vehicles that will start operating on the Elevate network in the 2023 timeframe will have pilots, but we think that the trend in the industry will definitely be to self-piloted. And so I think that 10 years, 15 years, somewhere in that range, it's really a regulatory problem as much as it is a technology problem. It's an easier technology problem than self-driving cars, but it's a much harder regulatory problem. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and there's regulations that will have to change to enable that to happen. And so that just has a certain baked-in time frame associated with it, and it hasn't really started yet. And so, but we do think that it's an inevitable trend on where the technology is pushing.
And how will you make sure that Uber Air is available to everyone and not just the wealthy?
Yeah. So when we start, we're looking at, basically we're trying to be realistic at kind of where we start in terms of price point. We build a cost model, look at what we think we can launch at with a small number of vehicles and a small number of Skyports kind of in early days. And it'll be a premium product out the gate, but we really believe, based on the modeling that we're doing, that by really pushing on the same things that have let us drive demand so incredibly well in our core product at Uber, which is two things: utilization and load factor, right? So we were able to drive utilization of private vehicles much, much higher, and thus effectively allow amortization of the cost over more trips. And then with Pool, we've been able to drive load factor much higher in the ground vehicles. And it's the same two things that matter with these air vehicles. And in fact, it probably matters even more. And that's the same game that's played in commercial aviation too, right? So by leveraging the power of our network, by this huge pool of demand that we have access to, we are then able, we believe from our models and the simulations that we're doing, basically with the same vehicles that we're able to launch with at a higher price point, drive the utilization up, drive the load factors up, and then drive the price down. And we think that over the course of a couple of years of building that operational capabilities, we'll be at kind of an UberX price per seat mile. So we'll be pretty competitive with ground transportation at that point. And then we think we can drive it even further from there as we move to self-piloting and kind of more automated manufacturing techniques. So that's the vision that we have as the North Star that we're driving toward.
Nice. And we are out of time, but last quick question. Best case scenario, the demo tests go well next year. Uber deploys Uber Air 2023 in the 3 launch cities. Let's say 10 years from now, how many cities do you want Uber Air to be in?
It's always dangerous to predict the future. But so I think that what we want, our ultimate vision is that in every major city that we're in, we think there's demand for Uber Air. And so I'm not sure what the number is in 10 years, but the longer term vision is that this is a product offering that we want to see in every major city that we're in around the world. And we're able to offer that as a real service, as a real benefit to our users in all the places that they want to move. And we think that there's just incredible potential to do that, and it's exciting to be working on it.
Okay. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.